General Joseph Alexander Mabry Jr. was a man of wealth, power, and prestige. He lived an extremely successful life as a large landowner, horse racing devotee, businessman, politician, journalist, and president of a railroad company. Yet, in the years before his tragic murder, a sudden change in character left him broke, desperate, and violent. How did such a successful life end in such a vicious manner? Many believe it was his shifty, chameleon-like character and the violence that surrounded his life that led to the downfall of Joseph Mabry Jr. He was born into a wealthy family on a large estate known as Mount Rest. His history with violence began at an early age with the murder of his father. And not only was he a part of the Civil War, the bloodiest war of the U.S., Joseph Mabry Jr. was also involved in many shootings and at least 6 murders, including the murders of his 2 eldest sons and himself. Despite the violence that constantly surrounded his life, Joseph Mabry Jr. was able to establish himself as a prosperous businessman. During the Civil War, he began a tent and clothing company to clothe the soldiers of the Confederacy. He himself took a more passive role in the war because he was busy running the tent and clothing depot as well as the Knoxville and Kentucky Railroad. It was also during the war that his shifty character began to emerge. He claimed he was a radical rebel, even donating $100,000 to the Confederate Treasury when his worth was only $91,000. Yet, as soon as the Union occupied Knoxville, he switched sides, seeking to establish himself as a Union supporter in order to recoup financial losses. From then on, Mabry frequently switched sides of the political spectrum. Within 2 years of beginning his political career, both the Radicals and the Democrats had mentioned him as a possible candidate for Congress. A political adversary, John Baxter, accused Mabry of being a conservative locally, a Republican at the state level, and a radical nationally. In fact, Mabry's political affiliations always reflected financial interest. He switched parties for a time to oppose changes to state aid to railroads because the changes would hurt his business. He pursued this action fiercely, yet found he had no political ambitions to gratify. Joseph Mabry's inconsistent character also showed up in his relationships with supposed friends such as William G. Brownlow and Thomas O'Connor. Brownlow hated ex-Confederates. He constantly slandered them in his paper, Brownlow's Knoxville Whig and Rebel Ventilator. Yet he never spoke of Mabry, probably because of Mabry's kindness towards him when he was jailed by the Confederates. Despite their apparent friendship, Mabry bought Brownlow's paper, turning it apolitical, saying, "They wish to harm no one, and wanting no one to harm us." However, the paper gradually shifted to Democratic, the exact opposite of Brownlow's original stance. Mabry and Brownlow were never friends again. But by now, Mabry had a new project. His name was Thomas O'Connor. When O'Connor moved to Knoxville, Mabry helped him get on his feet, and O'Connor eventually became the wealthiest man in Knoxville. Mabry and O'Connor became business partners and good friends, until Mabry turned on O'Connor like he had so many times before. Right after O'Connor had leased the entire state penitentiary for labor, Mabry lobbied for the repeal of the convict lease system. After he was betrayed, O'Connor had no more business deals with Mabry, until the land sale that resulted in their deaths. Mabry was not only deceitful with his friends, he was also misleading the community. He was a deacon in the Missionary Baptist Church and the highest degree of Masonry. Yet, as president of the Knoxville and Kentucky Railroad, he sought to enrich himself at the expense of the taxpayers. 39 miles of railroad track cost taxpayers more than $60,000 per mile. By this time, Joseph Mabry's shrewd character had driven him into financial hardship. He had lost many business partners, and expensive lawsuits over his railroad company were piling up. But it was his extensive history with violence that ultimately did him in. In June of 1870, Mabry shot John Baxter in the wrist, saying, "Business is business." The shooting was most likely over political differences and the debt between them. After the shooting, they were at each other's throats in accusations and cross-accusations. One ridiculous charge against Baxter included horse stealing. polygamy, making beastly attempts toward his third wife as she was on her deathbed, deliberately driving his business partner insane, and several other indelicate offenses against the laws of both man and nature. In the last few years of his life, Mabry was known for his drinking bouts and violent temper. This was due to the loss of land and business, and the death of his son, Will. Will was killed in a barroom quarrel, and Mabry was outraged when the murderer, Lusby, was released. Mabry and his son, Joseph Mabry III, killed Lusby, but were cleared of all charges. Mabry refused to accept that Will's death was a barroom fight. He believed it was part of a conspiracy led by Thomas O'Connor to gain more land that Mabry was forced to sell. On October 18, 1882, a drunk Mabry confronted O'Connor with threats against his life. But it was O'Connor who made those threats a reality. 2 days later, General Joseph A. Mabry Jr., Joseph Mabry III, and Thomas O'Connor were all killed in the gunfight. The papers called the incident the worst outbreak of violence since the Civil War. And most were in O'Connor's defense. So how did Mabry, a successful man with luxury and ease seemingly thrust upon him, end up a poor alcoholic shot dead in the street? The downfall of Joseph A. Mabry can be contributed to his shifty character that changed when presented with opportunities for advancement, and of course, the tragic violence that surrounded his life.